Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of the Broad Reach podcast. Thanks a million for joining us. And if you're joining us for the first time, you can go back and see the first few episodes. So we recently had an interview with Pat Lawless, the Irish entrant into the Golden Globe race, which was fantastic. And we're so thankful to everyone. We got a massive response. And so thankful to Pat especially. And Sean, did you have a few words to say about the video production?
Yeah, I just want to shout out to our good friend Colm Walsh, who's been helping us with the graphics and the editing and the video production. And it's great to kind of boost that and improve our production output a little bit.
Yeah, epic. So thanks a million to Colm, thanks to Pat, obviously, and thanks to everybody for sharing it. And it's still gaining a bit of traction, like getting loads of views. So it's brilliant getting our name out there now. We've had massive changes in the actual race. I think, Sean, you're going to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we'll go back and do a little bit of tracker work. And I'm just going to share my screen, Shane, so you can just give me a shout when this comes through.
Perfect.
Yeah. So for people who are wondering what this is, we've actually done a separate episode on this where we've given an in-depth update into how this actually works. This is a tracker system which follows everybody as they move around the world in this race. So we'll be talking about everybody on screen here now, maybe bar Jean-Luc and Bernard Mertissier, who are from other races. They're just there as references. So the big change since last week is Simon. So Simon is no longer in the GGR. He's now in Chichester class. He's officially declared that he's in Chichester class, which means he needs to stop. He's had an issue with his auto steering and he needs to stop in Chile and get it fixed. So that's why he's going up here to the northeast instead of down around Cape Horn, which would have been his track. This red line being the rum line, or shortest track back to the finish line. Interestingly, Kirsten and Abelish are also heading what looks like towards Chile as well, but I'll come back to that in a second. So first things first, our new leader is Kirsten. So this is fantastic for Kirsten. It's her first time in the lead, I think, in the entire race. Incredible achievement. She was closing in on Simon as they approached Hobart to within about 100 miles. Simon then pulled away incredibly after he left Hobart and the Tasman Sea, extended his lead to about 1,000 miles, which is around a week. And Kirsten and Abelish were quite a bit behind. So Simon was extending his lead, if anything, until really unfortunate news. He had this issue with the steering, and unfortunately, he's out of the race. So it's just Abelash, Kirsten, Gug, and Ian left in the actual GGR race itself. So down to 4 people. Am I right there, Shane?
Yeah, that's correct. And obviously, Simon's news is massive because he was the out-and-out leader for so long. But we believe he had a massive knockdown. I listened to the satellite call with Don, and Don was asking him about it. I think Simon might have been a little bit concussed. He was in a huge system when it happened. He was actually asleep. The boat definitely had a knockdown. The mast went in the water, and I think the top of his hydrovane was ripped off, as well as some handrails around the cockpit, some teak handrails were sheared off. So it must have been a pretty severe system. So thank God he's okay anyway, thankfully. And like Sean was saying, it's amazing now, Kirsten, to see Kirsten in the lead, but it just shows again the attrition of the race, Sean, doesn't it?
Yeah, like if you let's look at if we zoom out. So 32 people entered the race, I think it was 31 or 32. 16 people got to the start line. We're now down to 4. I mean, wow. It's just unbelievable. We still have other competitors like Simon. He's still in the race. He's going to stop, make his fixes and continue, and he'll be in a different class. It's called Chichester class. We've talked about it a lot in previous episodes. Jeremy also in Chichester class, and Guy Waits is technically in Chichester class, but he will be finishing completely the race once he passes the latitude of Hobart, because he has not made Hobart in time, and the cutoff point was the 31st of January. Again, we've talked about that in previous episodes, so if anybody wants more info on that, you can check back. So I'll just a couple of updates. So start with Ian. Maybe he's going pretty well. He's in a bit of a blow here, as is Jeremy. He's had to get around these islands here. Bounty Islands. We talked about Captain Bligh and the Bounty Islands last week. Or the previous week, I should say. So he's got around that now. He needs to get above the no-go zone. He should be okay with these conditions, but we just need to keep an eye on that. Jeremy as well, also moving. That's no problem. Gug had a little bit of a blip in that he went into the no-go zone. We don't know exactly what happened, whether he was asleep or just a mistake with navigation. We know it had been a bit cloudy. We can maybe have a look now and see how that is. Let's look at the cloud cover. So he's in the middle of thick cloud now. So he's probably finding it difficult to get sights on a sextant. Remember, we don't have modern technology on these boats. Everything is from approximately 1968. So the only way he can figure out where he is by taking a reading of the sun during the day. So if he's got cloud cover, he can't figure out where he is. So he's using only dead reckoning, which is essentially his boat speed and his bearing, is the position or the direction he's going, I should say, to figure out where he thinks he is. So it's really somewhat guesswork at the moment for Gug. He'll be penalised for going in here. I think 4.5 hours will he be penalised. So my understanding is somewhere in the North Atlantic, when he gets up there, he'll have to kind of stop and sail around in a circle, and then for 4.5 hours. I don't know exactly how that works, and what I've read is it's at a place and time to be determined. So that's that, Shane. Then this is new as of today, and there was an update from Don this morning on the GGR official tracker. Again, we recommend that people check that out. There's an update every morning from Don, really in depth about weather and the participants. We're just giving a high level overview, and they've kind of notified Abelash and Kirsten that there's a big storm coming. It's not a major concern yet, but they're going to be in it, and I think they've suggested that they get north. They can't say you must go north, because Abelash and Kirsten are the skippers. It's up to them to decide whether they want to go north or not. But I'll just run the weather through, Shane. I don't know if you've seen this, but it will become quite obvious what's happening now in a couple of days. So we'll just run through this weather. You've got this big system coming through, and it's going to clobber them.
Wow.
Yeah, and no matter how far they get north, now what they're trying to do is avoid this piece, this what looks like a calm in the middle, because what happens is you get very extreme changes from northerlies to southerlies, southwesterlies. You can get a really confused and dangerous sea. At least if they're kind of up here, it's going from north to westerly, north to northwesterly to westerly. It's not as an extreme a change in the sea state, and it shouldn't be as dangerous. It still will be a big blow. I mean, we're talking 40, 50 knots, gusting maybe 55, maybe a little bit higher, depending on how this changes over the coming days, because obviously this is an approximation, and what we're looking at here is 2 days' time in the evening. So that will change, and Don hasn't given them an exact forecast yet because it's too far out, but he's given them a heads up that, look, something's coming. And the suggestion or advice is that, you know, you might want to think about going north. That's the way it's kind of pointed out to them, and they've decided to go north.
I think he said on the update this morning, I think he referred to the 49 degrees line. He was saying if they try and stay above that, in terms of what you were just saying, like it's exactly like picking the worst, picking the best of a bad system. It's like trying to avoid the sea state, like you're saying, and something that will create a massive knockdown and really rip your boat. But do you know what's interesting about this, Sean? I was just thinking a while ago, if you zoom out and look at just the whole race right now, for me, I think Captain Gug is probably in the best position, because he's got a good course, or he's got good weather for the next, good sailing weather for the next week. his competitors are moving in the opposite direction to where they should be. He's been pretty consistent. Obviously, if we forget about the penalty, Captain Goog is in a good position. And also something that Don was saying about Ian, which was interesting. He was saying that sometimes Ian avoids going upwind, like to the point of hurting his boat. So Don was just making an observation that sometimes Ian will he's sailing much longer distances than the other competitors, but he's actually protecting his boat, and it shows like he's still in the race because it is such a race of attrition.
It's actually interesting, Shane, because it was in Hobart when Ian was on a mooring buoy. Don was interviewing him, and he said his strategy is attrition of the other competitors, something like that. In that, that's how he's getting up the leaderboard. He said it, of course, jokingly, but it's proven to actually be the case. That's the reality. He's in fourth place, which is actually incredible. I think that probably brings us nicely. Goog's progress brings us nicely into the next point, Shane. I think you're going to share us your screen of some of the GGR underground stats.
Oh yeah, I'll just pull that up there. We just wanted to show people the recent stats for the GGR. Like obviously Kirsten is in the lead, but we know that Kirsten has one of the fastest boats in the fleet. And recently she broke a lot of records. I think she got the fastest, the most distance in 24 hours. And I think in 7 days as well. But we'll just pull this up here and tell me if you can see it.
Yeah, can see it now.
Brilliant. So we can see here at the top of the screen, Kirsten is in the lead. She sailed 20,000 nautical miles of the 26,800 route. It's amazing. So you can see the top four there. Kirsten, Abalash, Captain Goog, and Ian, like Sean was saying. So if we just stroll down here, we just have a look at this chart, Sean. You can tell there it speaks for itself. If you look at Kirsten's, those green bars there, you can tell the consistency of her sailing. So
what are we looking at here, Shane?
So like each of these green bars is kind of a representation of her estimate speed in a day, and obviously green being good, and you can tell her average speed here, like 29th of January, 7.19 knots, and she's covered a lot of ground by having high average speeds.
Yeah,
and you can see the other competitors where the wind has dropped or if something has happened to the boat. So it's just if people want to go and check that out, it's a really good page just for seeing an overview of the race. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, we'll stick a link in the show notes. We did in, I think, 2 episodes ago as well. We also showed this. I think this is a great visual, Shane, because instantly you can see who's doing well and who isn't doing so well. And I remember the last time we shared this 2 or 3 weeks ago, we could see that it was all greens for Simon, and Kirsten and Abalash were more in the amber and red, and they'd been struggling at the time. So you really get a feel for how people have been doing in the last week. I just think it's a really good instant visual where you can kind of see, okay, Kirsten's doing well, Abalash is doing well, Goog is doing really well as well, and everybody else is not doing as well. But you can see, you can really see where Simon dipped in the middle and then where he's getting more consistent speeds in the last couple of days. So obviously things looking fine for him, bearing in mind that he's in Chichester class and he's on his way to Chile.
And this 7-day speed log really tells a lot of stories. We can tell here in the middle, that must have been when he had the knockdown, 1st of Feb. And if you look down at Guy Waits was in an enormous system. If anybody doesn't know, they should go back and check out some of the tracker updates with Don. They actually had to put a warning because they put Guy under an orange warning. They were worried about him. he was in up to like 12 to 15 meter seas with 70 knots. He was basically just getting pummeled for all of those days. So that speed log tells a lot, and it's a handy visual if people want to go and check it out. There's also more information on this page if people want to get more in depth about it. There's records down here. I always enjoy checking those out just to see if they've changed. I know Abalash, what's interesting to me is Abalash held nearly, I'd say 70% of those records at one point, and now it's Kirsten. So it's just interesting to see those change, see whose boat is performing the best and who's pushing it hard. So I think that's about that. That's about it if people want to check that out. So I just wanted to ask you something, Sean, about, I know when Captain Goog came into Hobart, he mentioned actually, and him and another skipper, I can't remember who now, might have been Jeremy, they were talking about as they approached Hobart, there isn't a lot of lights. And obviously, if you're, because these guys are using sextants and dead reckoning, as you come to land, it's funny in Bernard Moitessier's book, he talks about coming to land like he really doesn't want to come to land. It's just everything in his body is saying, no, stay at sea, you're going to hurt the boat. But Captain Goog, as he approaches Hobart, he couldn't see a lot of lights. And something that occurred to me was, I think it would be nice for especially the listeners and for myself, if you might just explain, Sean, the basics of lights as you approach a port. If you're on a yacht and you're approaching a port.
Yeah, I'm frantically pulling up charts of Hobart here, Shane, to answer this. No,
well, not specifically Hobart. I'm just talking about in general with ports.
Yeah. No, sure. I'm
the two things I wanted to ask you was, as you're approaching a port, obviously we know there's starboard and port buoys. How far out do they start? And can you have lights shining out of your boat as you approach a port? Is that okay? Can you talk a little bit about those things?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's a really important question, especially when you're sailing at night. So the bigger ports, like let's talk locally, for example, Dublin Port itself, which we discussed 2 episodes ago, Captain Bligh, that is lit up like a Christmas tree coming in. So you have normally what you have is a channel that leads into the port, which is marked by green and red markers. The green markers are starboard hand markers, which means you keep them on your right hand side, the starboard side of the boat. The red markers are port can markers. You keep them on the port side of your boat on the left hand side, and they guide you in. So as long as you stay within the green and the red, you're okay. And usually at a big port like that, at the start, you'll have what's called a safe water marker, which is a flashing white light. It's red and white on the chart. I almost said red and white there because it's red and white on the chart, but it's flashing white light. And that once you find that, you're at the start of a channel. But you wouldn't believe how difficult it is coming in. So I've come into Dublin Port at night, where the 2 big towers, the Pigeon House as they're called, those big white and red towers. I've come in as far as the marina there, and when you're trying to make out, each red light, for example, has a flashing sequence. So it might say flashing twice every 4 seconds. So it's like flash, 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 flash. Okay. But how do you make out that red light versus an indicator on a car, which is kind of similar? I remember coming in, it's very difficult. So you need to know the distance between each red marker as well. So they're all numbered. So you have got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on both the starboard side and on the port hand side. And so one goes up in even numbers, 1, 3, 5, 7. The other goes up in odd numbers, the other way around. But you should know the distance as well, because when you know the distance, you know what to expect. So it can be very confusing coming in. So what we normally do is we write like a pilotage plan, where you have a checklist of every single light that you should pass. And as you're going in at night, you tick them all off on your piece of paper, your pen, or on your phone, whatever way you want to do it. You tick it off as you pass them. You get the binoculars out. You read the number on the can. Is it number 1? Is it number 2? Yes. And then you're sure where you are. And even if you have GPS, I mean, the GPS can be slightly off. And if you're outside of a channel, you could be in shallow water, you could ground the boat. So it's really important.
Oh.
There's one slight anomaly to this as well, that if you take Dublin, for example, you have to call Dublin VTS, which is the Dublin Port Authorities. And when you're motoring into that marina at Poolbeg, they will actually say, stay south of the channel, right? So you're actually outside of the channel or very close to the southern edge. It's one or the other. I think sometimes they actually tell you stay outside the channel, because you think about it, you might have a massive Stena ferry coming out and you can't be there in your little small 10-meter boat in the middle of the channel going, I have right of way and this big massive ferry's got to move. That isn't how it works. You got to get out of the way of these big massive ships. So
there's a little bit of traffic control involved with some of these ports, obviously, like you're saying. So they might say, can you just hold off, stay south of the port? There's a lot of traffic.
Yeah, so they'll guide you in the bigger ports. In smaller ports, there might be very minimal lighting. There might be, like take Dunleary as an example. There's no channel into Dunleary, but there is a lighthouse or a green and a red marker on both sides of the actual walls of the harbour as you're going in. So they guide you. Obviously, the green is on the right, the red is on the left, and that gets you in the mouth of the harbour. And then it's very safe and secure within that harbour. But that's all there is, pretty much, if memory serves me, coming into Dunleary. So when you actually cross Dublin Bay, we showed it again on the Captain Blythe episode. You cross Dublin Bay from Dublin City Port across to Dunleary. There's not a lot of lights there in between. There's a couple of, I think, cardinal markers to tell you to keep away from rocks. And then you're straight into Dunleary.
That's fascinating. Brilliant.
But there are other ports in other countries and in Ireland that aren't lit up at all. So you could technically have a port that isn't lit or has maybe one light, like one red light or one green light. So it very much is determined by how big the port is, how much shipping there is. So if you're planning, say, to go on a trip from, I don't know, let's take an example, from Holyhead across to Dublin, to keep the Dublin example. Like, if you've never been to Dublin before and never been to Dunleary, you can read about it on your pilot book, but you probably want to arrive at dawn, or you probably want to arrive during the day, so that you've got a lot of visuals and you're not taking any risks that you're arriving at night.
And is there any kind of basic depth sounder on a boat besides your charts and stuff, obviously? Like if you're not a lot of lights and you're kind of wondering where you are, you're probably thinking, am I in shallow waters here? How close to the land am I if it's dark?
Yes, most modern boats will have depth sounder, and you're always monitoring it. The boats that the guys have will always do that. You can actually use the depth sounder in a very clever way to figure out where you are. So if you look at the charts, we'll do it on another episode, Shane. I know you've got a big, massive chart of the sea.
Yeah, I do have a chart, yeah.
It is really interesting. And what you can do is you can use your depth sounder as a navigational aid, because you've got these contour lines that people are familiar with that run, and these have been charted under the sea. So if you see, say, a 20-meter contour line and you're reading 20 meters on your depth sounder, you're on top of that or close to it. Now, you also have to add the height of tide. So you need to work out the height of tide. So if the tide is 2 meters, it's actually when the depth sounder hits 22 that you're on the 20-meter contour line. So you're constantly having to do all these calculations in your head as you're driving the boat in. But these are things that you do and you get used to doing, and it just kind of comes naturally. And it's really...
Did Johnson have a depth sounder?
I don't know. I would say he did. I think when you're anchoring, he anchored a lot, and when you're anchoring, I think, you really need a depth sounder if you're anchoring. Of course, depth sounders can break down, and then you're going off the chart, but you err on the side of caution. I think Knox Johnson may have grounded his boat in Australia at one point, if memory serves me correctly, where he just touched sand or touched the bottom of the ocean and quickly reversed. I'm pretty sure that happened.
Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Of course, on your own boat, you asked me about your own boat. On your own boat, you have lights depending on the size of the boat, but normally you'll have one green light on the starboard side of the boat, one red light on the port side of the boat, a white light on the back, and maybe a white light on your mast as well.
Okay. So you
very
can't
much
just put an LED floodlight and just you
No.
gotta only have a certain color, certain direction. That's interesting.
Yeah, there's regulations called the collar eggs, which are extremely strict. And like, if you're operating a boat at night, you need to know these inside out, because you need to be able to look out to your left hand side off the port side of the boat and go, you see some flashing lights. Is that a fishing boat? Is it a pilot boat? The funny one that we always get when these things come up in exams is it a minesweeper? Because there's lights for a minesweeper, would you believe it? Which obviously came from, historical times, but we all know the lights for the minesweeper. And you need to know the difference between fishing vessels, trawling vessels, all of this type of stuff. You need to figure out, are the lights coming at me? Are they going away from me? And there's ways to figure all that stuff out. So we can go into depth in that and another one as well.
Cool. Yeah, that's definitely, we'll revisit that on a future episode, especially depth sounders in relation to the GGR. So I think, Sean, were you going to ask me a few questions before we wrapped it up?
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to make a small announcement in that we've been in touch with another skipper who's on the race, and we're planning to do another interview. Obviously, it went really well with Pat, and we're delighted to have Pat, and we're planning to extend that interview series out to additional participants. So we don't have a date confirmed for that, but it's going to be in the coming weeks. So we're really excited about that. So that's the quick update on that. And I think that's pretty much it for this week, Shane.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's massive news. So we're really excited about that next interview coming, and I think people are going to love it. So thanks everybody for clicking on us again and watching our latest episode. And we'll be back again with episode 6. We'll be back again with an interview with a skipper. So we have to keep it secret who it is.
Cheers, folks.
So cheers. Thanks a million for watching, everyone.